Do you remember when I came to the hospital when you was in the hospital?
No.
Father of a woman you believed was your daughter, of yet another daughter, the defendant, Ms. Webb. Now, Ms. Webb, you claim that while you've always believed Mr. Edwards is your dad,
No doubts.
you never had a doubt.
Nope.
So why are we here? You wasn't there anyway. It shouldn't matter to you, so.
It does.
It shouldn't.
Despite your inability to truly explain why you weren't there, I can tell you're hurting over this. You could walk out of that courtroom that day and say, anything I may have thought was the truth, after this day, I'm not sure what I believe about anything. And so I respect the fact that you came back into this courtroom to just say, I just need the truth all the way around. I just need to figure this thing out.
I'm sorry that I wasn't in your life, Meaden. Of course not.
No, the last memory I have of you was 13 years ago.
This court-based story unfolds under the authority of Judge Lauren Lake, where multiple families arrive carrying years of doubt, emotional damage, and unanswered questions that can no longer be ignored. The description centers on what is happening inside the courtroom at the evidence stage, how each party presents their claims, and how DNA test results ultimately reshape lives. This is not just about biology. It is about the relationship between law and justice, and how the concept of justice in jurisprudence becomes deeply personal when real families are involved. At the start, the court addresses a man who has already experienced devastating truth in a previous appearance. He believed himself to be a father for years, only to learn through a DNA test that the child he claimed was not biologically his. That earlier ruling did not bring closure. Instead, it opened a new wound and planted doubt that carried him back into court. Now he stands before Judge Lauren Lake again, facing another possible paternity question involving a second young woman who also grew up believing he was her father. This sets the emotional foundation of the case, showing how people regret taking truth lightly, because once revealed, it cannot be undone. The courtroom dynamic immediately reflects tension. The alleged father explains that after hearing contradictory testimonies, lies, and confusing evidence in the earlier case, he no longer knows what to believe. His request for another DNA test is not presented as an attack, but as a desperate attempt to stabilize his understanding of reality. Judge Lake carefully frames this moment as part of the court's responsibility to deliver clarity, reinforcing how truth changes everything, whether it heals or harms. The young woman involved explains her own position. She entered court hoping the DNA test would show he is not her biological father. Her reasoning is rooted in years of emotional absence rather than hatred. She describes missed birthdays, missed holidays, and a lack of acknowledgement that caused long-term emotional distance. Judge Lake allows her testimony to stand as evidence of emotional impact, even though the legal issue remains biological paternity. This is a powerful illustration of how courtrooms do more than determine facts. They expose consequences. As the court proceeds, the judge ensures the audience understands that signing a birth certificate, giving a last name, and verbal acknowledgement do not always align with biological truth. The DNA test is presented as the only neutral witness left. When the results are revealed, the court determines that the man is not the biological father. The ruling brings relief to the young woman but leaves visible emotional collapse for the man, who now confronts the reality that two daughters he believed were his are not biologically connected to him. This moment reflects a recurring theme in DNA test people regret taking, because certainty often brings pain rather than peace. The court does not end there. Judge Lauren Lake transitions to another connected matter, involving a woman who has spent her life searching for her biological father. Despite multiple tests, each potential match has resulted in exclusion. The court presents video testimony and lab reports, showing the procedural seriousness of the evidence stage. Each DNA result eliminates another possibility, reinforcing how adoption stories, full episodes, and long-term paternity disputes often stretch across decades without resolution. The emotional impact of repeated exclusions highlights the human cost of unresolved parentage. The description then shifts to a separate but thematically linked divorce case involving child support, cheating allegations, and text message evidence. Here, the courtroom examines how digital evidence becomes central to modern disputes. The alleged father claims the mother was involved in DNA test cheating stories, pointing to explicit text messages exchanged during the conception window. Judge Lake carefully analyzes the timeline, using conception calculations and message timestamps to determine whether the evidence supports his claims. This portion demonstrates adverse inference in Evidence Act principles, where behavior and credibility affect interpretation even before DNA results are announced. The mother admits to sending messages but denies physical infidelity, arguing that emotional communication does not equal conception. Judge Lake emphasizes that words, once spoken or written, carry consequences. The court explores how spite, jealousy, and emotional retaliation often distort truth, especially in divorce case proceedings. This reinforces the relationship between law and justice, where legal standards must remain firm even when personal behavior is messy. When the DNA test results are finally read, the court determines that the man is indeed the biological father. The ruling immediately reframes prior behavior, forcing accountability. Judge Lake addresses the emotional damage inflicted on the child, referencing recorded testimony that shows the child feeling unloved. This moment ties into Supreme Court child support principles at a practical level, reminding viewers that paternity is not only about genetics but responsibility. Throughout the proceedings, Judge Lauren Lake consistently returns to the idea that truth is not optional in court. Whether through lab reports, text messages, or sworn testimony, the court acts as a filter separating belief from fact. The description captures how the game-changing attorney podcast themes are reflected in real proceedings, where evidence can instantly shift power, responsibility, and perception. The courtroom atmosphere remains professional but emotionally charged. Judge Lake balances firmness with empathy, allowing participants to speak while holding them accountable. The court becomes a place of reckoning rather than punishment, aligning with principles often discussed in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where acknowledgement precedes healing. By the end of the description, it is clear that these cases are interconnected by one central truth. DNA tests do not create problems, they reveal them. The court does not assign blame for past behavior but determines present reality. Whether involving absent fathers, emotional neglect, cheating allegations, or child support obligations, the outcomes demonstrate how truth changes everything once placed on the record. This description explains what is happening in court without dramatization or scenes, focusing solely on legal process, emotional testimony, and final results. It reflects the structure of full courtroom episodes, where law, evidence, and human consequence collide. The cases collectively show why people come to court seeking answers, and why many leave realizing that some answers carry a lifetime of weight. This next portion of the description continues to explain what unfolds inside the courtroom as the legal process moves deeper into accountability, responsibility, and consequence. Under Judge Lauren Lake, the court transitions from establishing biological truth to confronting what that truth now demands from the people involved. After the DNA confirmation that Mr. Dampier is the biological father, the courtroom atmosphere shifts from accusation to obligation. Judge Lake makes it clear that once paternity is legally established, denial is no longer acceptable. The court emphasizes that child support, emotional presence, and consistent parenting are not optional outcomes but legal and moral duties. This moment reflects how Supreme Court child support principles are applied at a practical human level, not as abstract law, but as real-life responsibility tied to a real child. The judge directly addresses how years of doubt, fueled by cheating accusations and misleading statements, have already caused measurable harm. The court reviews how repeated claims of infidelity, even when not proven, create long-term emotional instability for children. This reinforces the concept of justice in jurisprudence, where the court must consider not only factual outcomes, but the broader impact of adult behavior on minors. The mother's testimony continues to be examined carefully. Judge Lake does not excuse her actions, especially her admission that she intentionally tried to provoke jealousy by engaging in suggestive text exchanges. The court frames this behavior as emotionally reckless, explaining that while it may not prove physical cheating, it does create reasonable doubt. This discussion aligns with the idea of adverse inference in Evidence Act principles, where credibility is shaped by conduct, not just denial. Judge Lake stresses that truth is not determined by repetition. Saying, "I never cheated," does not outweigh timelines, messages, or biological results. This moment echoes themes often discussed in the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where personal narratives collapse when confronted with verifiable evidence. The courtroom becomes an educational space, illustrating how evidence stage analysis works in real cases, not as entertainment but as legal necessity. As the hearing progresses, attention returns to the emotional welfare of the child. Video testimony is referenced again, reminding the court why the case exists beyond adult conflict. Judge Lake explains that favoritism, emotional withdrawal, and inconsistent parenting often stem from unresolved paternity doubt. Now that the DNA test has resolved that doubt, the expectation is immediate behavioral change. This reflects how court rulings are designed not only to decide facts, but to correct future conduct. The description also highlights how divorce case dynamics often complicate paternity disputes. Judge Lake points out that intimate relationships continuing during legal conflict only deepen confusion and resentment. The court makes clear that intimacy without commitment or clarity undermines both legal outcomes and emotional stability. This reinforces lessons commonly explored in the Divorce Course podcast, where unresolved attachment keeps people trapped in cycles of conflict. From there, the court revisits the earlier paternity matters involving Mr. Edwards, connecting themes across cases. Judge Lake explains that repeated DNA exclusions, while devastating, are not failures of the system. Instead, they demonstrate the court's commitment to accuracy over comfort. In adoption stories, full episodes, and long-term identity cases, closure often comes slowly and painfully. The law cannot invent fathers. It can only confirm or deny biological connections. The courtroom discussion emphasizes that regret is a recurring outcome in these cases. Regret for years lost, regret for words spoken in anger, regret for delaying truth. This is why DNA test people regret taking is not about fear of science but fear of consequence. Judge Lake explains that while truth may dismantle beliefs, living with falsehood causes deeper damage over time. The judge also addresses the broader relationship between law and justice. Law provides structure, procedure, and rules of evidence. Justice, however, requires honesty, accountability, and sometimes apology. The court can order child support, mandate compliance, and issue judgments, but it cannot force emotional repair. That responsibility rests with the individuals involved. As testimony concludes, Judge Lake summarizes the court's position with clarity. Paternity has been resolved through DNA. Allegations of cheating have been weighed against evidence. Emotional harm has been acknowledged. The next steps are no longer about questioning truth, but about living with it. This is presented as a turning point, a moment where denial ends and responsibility begins. The description makes clear that these cases are not isolated incidents, but representative of broader societal patterns. Many parents arrive in court influenced by rumors, screenshots, and suspicion, rather than verified fact. The court exists to cut through noise and deliver finality. This is why the Game Changing Attorney podcast often references cases like these, where a single piece of evidence reshapes the entire legal narrative. Judge Lauren Lake's role remains central throughout. Her approach balances firmness with empathy, ensuring participants feel heard without allowing emotion to override fact. She reinforces that court is not a stage for revenge or validation, but a place where truth is documented and enforced. This judicial consistency is what allows the system to function even when emotions run high. As this segment of the description closes, the focus remains on outcomes rather than spectacle. DNA results stand. Parental responsibility is established. Emotional consequences are acknowledged. The court moves forward, not because everything is healed, but because clarity has finally replaced doubt. This continuation reinforces the central theme of the entire courtroom story. Once truth enters the record, there is no returning to uncertainty. The law does not ask whether people are ready for truth. It asks whether they are willing to accept it. This final portion of the description brings the courtroom narrative to its full conclusion, focusing on resolution, consequence, and the long shadow that truth leaves behind once the court record is closed. Judge Lauren Lake remains the central authority guiding each case toward legal finality, while making it clear that emotional closure is a separate journey the court cannot control. As the proceedings conclude, Judge Lake reiterates that DNA testing is not a weapon, nor is it a punishment. It is a tool of clarity. The courtroom has now witnessed multiple outcomes: fathers excluded, fathers confirmed, hopes dismantled, and responsibilities enforced. Each ruling demonstrates that the evidence stage is where emotion meets reality, and reality always prevails. This reinforces why so many cases discussed in the Truth Changes Everything podcast center on DNA, because once science speaks, argument ends. The court addresses the long-term impact of delayed truth. Judge Lake explains that when adults avoid resolution, children live inside uncertainty. That uncertainty often manifests as emotional withdrawal, behavioral issues, and identity confusion. These are not abstract concepts. They are measurable consequences the court sees repeatedly. This explanation ties directly into the concept of justice in jurisprudence, where justice is not just about fairness between adults, but protection for those who have no control over the situation. In the paternity disputes presented, Judge Lake emphasizes that regret is a recurring theme. Men regret not being present. Women regret statements made out of anger. Families regret years spent believing something that was never verified. This is why DNA test people regret taking truth is such a powerful idea, not because truth is harmful, but because it exposes how much damage silence already caused. The court also reflects on credibility. Judge Lake makes it clear that credibility is built through consistency. Text messages, timelines, and testimony are all weighed together. When someone admits to provoking jealousy, withholding information, or making false claims, that behavior influences how the court interprets their words. This reflects adverse inference in Evidence Act reasoning, where the absence of honesty weakens credibility even before lab results are read. As the rulings stand, the court transitions to responsibility. For confirmed fathers, Judge Lake outlines expectations related to child support, emotional involvement, and respect. She reminds them that child support is not a favor or leverage in relationships. It is a legal obligation grounded in the child's right to stability. This connects directly to Supreme Court child support principles, where the child's welfare outweighs adult conflict. For those excluded by DNA, Judge Lake addresses emotional aftermath. Being ruled out as a biological parent does not erase shared history, but it does redefine responsibility. The court does not minimize the grief that follows exclusion, especially for individuals who invested years believing in a parental bond. This moment highlights the quiet pain often overlooked in DNA test cheating stories, where exclusion leaves people questioning not only relationships but their own judgment. Judge Lake also returns to the topic of ongoing relationships during legal conflict. She explains that intimacy without clarity often worsens disputes, blurring emotional boundaries and prolonging instability. This observation mirrors discussions found in the Divorce Course podcast, where unresolved attachment keeps families trapped in cycles of conflict long after legal answers are available. Throughout this final segment, the relationship between law and justice is reinforced repeatedly. Law provides answers. Justice demands accountability. The court can establish paternity, order support, and close cases, but justice requires individuals to change behavior once truth is known. Judge Lake makes it clear that refusing to change after truth is revealed is not confusion, it is defiance. The description also reflects on the broader societal pattern seen in these cases. Many people arrive in court convinced that belief equals truth. The courtroom dismantles that assumption. Evidence, not belief, determines outcome. This is why cases like these are often referenced in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where one verified fact shifts the entire legal and emotional landscape. As Judge Lake prepares to adjourn, she acknowledges the emotional weight carried by everyone involved. Some leave with answers they wanted. Others leave with answers they feared. But no one leaves without clarity. The court record now reflects reality, not assumption. That distinction is the core function of the justice system. The final rulings emphasize that truth is permanent. Once entered into evidence, it cannot be erased by denial, nostalgia, or regret. This is especially evident in adoption stories, full episodes, and long-running paternity searches, where answers may come late but still redefine identity. Judge Lake acknowledges that while timing may feel cruel, delayed truth is still better than lifelong uncertainty. As the courtroom clears, the description underscores a final message. DNA testing does not destroy families, secrets do. The court does not create pain, it exposes it. Healing, if it comes, begins only after truth is accepted. This principle echoes across every case handled by Judge Lauren Lake and defines why these courtroom stories resonate so deeply. The proceedings conclude not with celebration but with accountability. The law has spoken. Evidence has been weighed. Responsibility has been assigned. What happens next lies outside the courtroom, in choices made after the gavel falls. This final segment completes the full courtroom narrative by showing how legal truth reshapes lives long after the case ends. It explains what happens in court, who appears, what evidence is examined, and how results are delivered, without dramatization, without scenes, and without exaggeration. The story stands as a complete illustration of how truth, once revealed, changes everything.